The alarm cut through the bridge before anyone spoke. Captain Connor Ellis grabbed the armrest of his command chair as the ship lurched out of faster-than-light travel. The screens lit up all at once. 47 alien warships, dead ahead, already in firing range. "Battle stations," Ellis said, not loud. He did not need loud. Lieutenant Diane Walsh was already moving, her fingers pulling up the targeting grid before the second word left his mouth. The tactical display spread across the front wall of the bridge like a wound, red marks everywhere, organized in tight attack formations, the kind of patterns that the Vakari Empire had used to end 17 wars in 30 years. The Vakari were efficient. That was the word every intelligence report used. Efficient ships, efficient tactics, efficient kills. They had never fought humans before. On the Vakari command vessel, Fleet Admiral Korath studied the lone human ship that had dropped out of the anomaly directly into the path of his fleet. His senior weapons officer, Dean, stood at his side with a data tablet. Neither of them spoke for a moment. The human ship was wrong. That was the only word for it. The hull was asymmetrical. One side carried heavier armor plating than the other, irregular, almost random-looking panels of different thickness bolted across the frame in no discernible pattern. The ship had 4 engine clusters, but they were not positioned for speed or balance. They sat wide apart at odd angles, as if placed with no concern for elegant design. There were strange protrusions along the dorsal spine that served no visible purpose. Weapon ports were scattered across the hull in a way that made no tactical sense. 2 large ones on the left, 5 smaller ones on the right, and 3 more pointing downward at angles that covered what appeared to be empty space. "Is it damaged?" Dean asked. Korath looked at his fleet sensor data. "No, this is how they built it." The silence on the bridge lasted exactly 2 seconds. Then the human ship fired first. Not a warning shot, not a ranging burst. The first shot crossed 40,000 kilometers and detonated against the shields of Korath's third destroyer before his tactical officer had finished calling out the engagement range. The blast was enormous, a wide-impact kinetic detonation that pushed the destroyer 11 kilometers off its formation position. "Return fire," Korath said. Every ship in the fleet with a clean angle opened up simultaneously. The human vessel did not attempt to evade. It moved slightly, a slow, rolling adjustment, and the first wave of Vakari fire hit mostly empty space. What did connect struck the heavy armor side. The panels absorbed and distributed the impact. The human ship kept moving. "Hull breach?" Dean asked. The sensor officer shook her head. "Negative, no breach detected." Korath leaned forward. The human ship was now moving through the outer edge of his fleet formation, and it was doing something that made no sense. Instead of creating distance, instead of running, which any rational warship would do against 47 opponents, it was pushing deeper in, toward the center, toward the heaviest concentration of Vakari firepower. On the bridge of the human vessel, Walsh called out impact reports in a flat, steady voice. "Port armor holding. Engine Cluster 2 took a graze, Nathan. I need Cluster 2. "Cluster 2 is fine," Nathan Cole's voice came back from engineering. "That was a Level 3 hit, built for Level 6. "Good," Ellis said. He watched the tactical display. The Vakari formation was adjusting, contracting, trying to box the human ship in. They were doing exactly what the simulations had predicted. Take us through their center line. Fire at will. The ship had a name painted on the hull in letters large enough to read from 1,000 kilometers away. The letters said, ISV Fenrir. The Vakari fleet had no record of it, no profile in any intelligence database. This was the first time a ship of this class had ever appeared in Vakari space. Fleet Admiral Korath had been at war for 40 years, and in 40 years he had never encountered a warship he could not immediately classify and counter. He could not classify this one. The Fenrir pushed through the center of his formation at medium speed, firing in 4 directions at once, and Korath watched one of his cruisers take a direct hit from the weapon's cluster pointing downward, the one that had appeared to cover empty space, and understood in that moment that the empty space had never been empty at all. It was a firing lane, deliberately designed, deliberately concealed. The entire ship was a trap. He just did not know what kind yet. "All ships," he said, "focus fire on the engine clusters, take out its propulsion." The order went out. 47 ships reoriented toward the 4 wide-set engine clusters of the Fenrir. The hits landed, several direct impacts clean and precise. The Fenrir's engines did not go down. Dean stared at the sensor readout. "How is it still?" "Because those are not all the engines," Korath said. His voice had gone very quiet. "Scan the entire hull, find every power signature." The scan returned 30 seconds later. The human ship had 11 separate propulsion units, 4 large, 7 small, distributed across the hull in the same scattered, senseless pattern as everything else on the ship. 7 of them were completely hidden behind armor panels and structural elements that no Vakari targeting system had flagged as relevant. Korath looked at the damage reports coming in from 3 of his destroyers. "They built redundancies into everything," Dean said. "Not redundancies," Korath said. He understood now. Not all of it, but enough to feel something he had not felt in 40 years of war. "Get me every scan we have of that ship," he said. "Every detail. I want to know what else we are missing." On the Fenrir, Connor Ellis watched the Vakari fleet trying to adapt. They would need more time for that. He did not plan to give it to them. The Vakari fleet pulled back slightly and reorganized. Korath pushed his heavy cruisers forward, ships with stronger shields and longer-range weapons. It was the standard counter-formation for a fast, aggressive opponent. In 30 years of fleet command, this move had never failed him. The Fenrir did not slow down. It continued its push through the fleet's center, targeting specific ships in a specific order. Not the nearest ones, not the largest ones. Ships in positions that disrupted the formation's geometry, the pieces that held the others in place. It was taking apart Korath's fleet arrangement the way a careful person takes apart a machine, removing the structural links first. Walsh called positions from the tactical grid. "Cruiser on our 11 is lining up a broadside, 2 destroyers moving to bracket us from below." "The bracket ships first," Ellis said. "We are facing the cruiser." "I know, fire on the bracket ships." Walsh hesitated half a second. Then she fired. The weapons cluster on the underside of the Fenrir, the one Korath had initially dismissed as poorly placed, opened up on the 2 destroyers approaching below them before those ships had completed their approach. One took a direct hit to its propulsion array. The other pulled back. The broadside from the cruiser hit the Fenrir's starboard side. It was a heavy hit. The bridge shook. 3 consoles flickered. One went dark. "Damage report," Ellis said. Cole's voice came over the comm without pause. "Starboard armor section delta is down to 40%, redirecting load to the secondary layer." "Secondary layer?" Walsh turned to look at Ellis. "We have a secondary armor layer." 3, Ellis said, and he almost smiled. On the Vakari command vessel, Dean pulled up the hull schematic his team had assembled in the last 10 minutes. "Look at this. The outer armor is not a single structure. It is layered. Each panel is independent. When one layer is compromised, the ship automatically redistributes the structural load to." "How many layers?" Korath asked. "We cannot confirm yet. At least 2, possibly more." "And the weapons?" Dean scrolled to the weapons analysis. His tone shifted slightly, the voice of a man reporting something he found genuinely difficult to explain. "The weapons are not centrally networked. Each cluster appears to have its own independent targeting system, its own power supply, and its own fire control. If we disable the main weapons array, the individual clusters will continue to operate independently. Korath looked at the display. The Fenrir had just disabled another destroyer and was looping back through the formation with no apparent loss of speed. So to fully disarm it, we would need to destroy every individual weapons cluster separately. Yes. How many clusters? 19 confirmed, possibly more concealed beneath the armor panels. The bridge went quiet. It is not a warship, Korath said slowly. It is 19 warships inside one hull. He stood up. In 40 years of command, he had given orders from a seated position. Standing meant something was different. All units, he said, ignore formation tactics. Every ship fires independently, full spread, maximum rate. We overwhelm the armor layers one section at a time, and we do not stop until that ship is debris. 44 ships, 3 had been disabled or had retreated, opened fire simultaneously. On the Fenrir, Ellis watched the incoming fire on the tactical display. It looked like a wall. Evasive pattern 7, he said. The Fenrir rolled. Not fast. It had never been a fast ship and nobody had ever pretended otherwise. But it rolled with surprising precision, presenting its heaviest armor facing to the densest concentration of incoming fire while simultaneously exposing its weapons clusters for a return volley. The hits that connected were enormous. The lights on the bridge dimmed. Damage alarms sounded across 6 decks simultaneously. Cole was already talking before the shaking stopped, his voice flat and fast, listing systems in a rhythm that sounded almost like a count. Outer armor sections Alpha, Gamma, and Theta are gone. Secondary layer holding. Engine cluster 1 is offline, switching to clusters 5 and 9. Forward weapons array is clear. Port midsection weapons clear. Dorsal cluster clear. All reactor cores are green. Walsh looked at her board. We just took a hit that would have cracked a standard warship in half. We are not a standard warship, Ellis said. He was watching the Vakari fleet trying to adapt in real time on the tactical display, ships repositioning, trying to make sense of what they were looking at. They were not panicking yet. They would. Nathan, Ellis said into the comm, how are we looking on power reserves? 91%, Cole said. Walsh turned around again. We just absorbed a full fleet broadside and we are at 91% power. The reactor design routes excess impact energy back into the system, Ellis said. Their shots are partially fueling us. Walsh stared at him. Connor, who built this ship? Someone who thought about every possible way a ship could die, Ellis said, and then made sure none of those ways worked. The Fenrir fired again. 3 more Vakari ships fell out of formation. 17 years earlier, a man named Nathan Cole had sat in a room full of engineers and told them something nobody wanted to hear. He had been 26 years old, holding a coffee mug that said "World's Okayest Engineer" on it, a gift from his sister, and he had looked around the table at people with more degrees and more experience and more funding than he would ever have, and he had said, "We are building ships to win the battles we know about. We should be building ships to survive the battles we don't." Nobody had listened. The meeting had been about efficiency, fuel efficiency, combat efficiency, cost efficiency. The new generation of human warships was going to be sleek and fast and powerful. The designs were beautiful. The projections were impressive. Cole had gone home that night and started working on something else entirely. It had taken him 6 years to finish the first full design. He called it the Persistence class, which was not an exciting name, but it was the right one. He had borrowed ideas from everywhere, from the way human bodies distribute blood flow when one artery is blocked, from the way old stone bridges spread weight across multiple arches so that no single stone ever carries a fatal load, from the way soldiers in ancient times layered armor because a blade that gets through the first layer still has to get through the second. He had taken every lesson about survival that humanity had ever learned in 5,000 years of fighting each other, and had put all of it into one ship design. The review board called it wasteful, redundant, inefficient, too heavy, too complicated, too expensive. Cole had asked them one question: how many of our current ships have we lost in the last decade? The answer had been 43. The review board approved the Persistence-class design 6 weeks later. The first ship built under that design had been named the Fenrir. Cole was now 43 years old, sitting in the engineering bay of that ship while it absorbed fire from 44 alien warships, and he felt something he had never expected to feel in this situation. He felt calm. Because the ship was doing exactly what he had designed it to do. Every alarm that sounded was a system responding correctly. Every rerouted power line was a redundancy functioning as intended. The armor was not failing. It was sacrificing itself in layers, exactly as planned, protecting the structure underneath. Cole, Ellis's voice came over the comm. The Vakari are pulling back. They are regrouping. Good, Cole said. Give me 4 minutes. I am rerouting power from the compromised armor sections to reinforce the reactor shielding. You have 2. Then I will do it in 2. On the Vakari command vessel, the situation had deteriorated significantly. In 40 minutes of engagement, Fleet Admiral Korath had lost 11 ships, destroyed or disabled. 7 more were operating at reduced capacity. The Fenrir had not retreated. It had not slowed. It had not sent a distress signal or a surrender request. It just kept fighting. Korath's second-in-command, a veteran officer named Pell, stood at the back of the bridge. Pell was a quiet man who thought carefully before saying anything. What he said now was this: "We have been treating this like a battle. It is not." Korath looked at him. "We hit it with everything we had," Pell said. "We hit it with more combined firepower than we used to crack the Shen station during the Third Border War, and it is still there." He paused. "This is not a battle. This is a test, and we are the ones being tested." Korath turned back to the display. The Fenrir was repositioning, not retreating, repositioning, putting distance between itself and the 3 Vakari cruisers that still had full combat capability. "What are they doing?" Dean asked. "They are not running," Pell said. "They are choosing a better angle." He was right. 40 seconds later, the Fenrir opened fire again, and this time the targeting was different. It was going for communications arrays, sensor clusters. It was not trying to destroy the remaining Vakari ships. It was trying to blind them. A blinded fleet cannot coordinate. Take away coordination and 40 ships become 40 individuals, each one capable, but none capable enough to fight the Fenrir alone. The Vakari fleet was built for precise, collective warfare. Coordination was its core strength. Korath understood the strategy. In the moment it became clear. "Restore communications to all ships," he ordered. "Priority emergency channels only." 3 ships have already lost primary comms, the sensor officer reported. 2 more are degraded. The Fenrir had been in this fight for less than an hour. It had come in alone against 47 warships and was now dismantling his command structure one sensor array at a time. Pell, Korath said. "Yes." "Send the recall signal." Pell did not move for a moment. "The recall signal brings the reserve fleet. The reserve fleet is for existential threats." "I'm aware of what it is for," Korath said. "Send it," Pell agreed quietly. The reserve fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel 14 minutes later. 22 additional warships, led by a dreadnought called the Vakari Dawn, the largest active warship in the Empire's fleet. It carried more firepower than the original 47 ships combined. Its shields were rated to absorb a sustained bombardment for 6 continuous hours. Walsh saw it arrive on the tactical display and felt something cold move through her chest. "Connor," she said. "I see it," Ellis said. The Vicari Dawn alone outmassed the Fenrir by a factor of 9. With the remaining fleet ships repositioned around it, the battle geometry had shifted completely. The Fenrir was now facing a wall of firepower that dwarfed anything it had absorbed so far. "Options," Ellis said. "Retreat," Walsh said immediately. "We go faster than light right now, while we still can." "They will follow." "Yes, but we will have time to." "No," Ellis said. "They will follow and they will catch us eventually, and when they do we will not have chosen the terms. We choose the terms here." He looked at the display. "Nathan, what do we have left?" Cole's voice came back steadier than Walsh expected. "Outer armor is mostly gone, but the secondary layer is intact across all critical sections. We have 14 of 19 weapons clusters operational, 7 of 11 propulsion units. All reactor cores are green. We are at 73% combat capability." "The reserve fleet is at 100%, Walsh said. "Yes," Ellis agreed, "but they have never seen a ship like ours before today, and we have had 40 minutes to learn exactly how they fight." He stood up from the command chair. It was the first time during the engagement he had stood, and the bridge crew noticed it the way bridge crews notice small things in a fight, sharply, completely, filing it away. The Vicari Dawn came in at full combat speed, its escorts forming a disciplined arc around it. Koreth had transferred his flag to the dreadnought. He wanted to end this himself. The Fenrir did not run. It turned directly toward the Vicari Dawn and accelerated. On the dreadnought's bridge, one of the younger officers made an involuntary sound, not words, just the noise a person makes when something surprises them. The Fenrir was heading straight for the largest warship in the Vicari fleet at full speed. "It is going to ram us," the officer said. "At that size the damage would be minimal," Dean said. "Our shields would." The Fenrir opened fire at 3 kilometers range. Not with its forward weapons array. Not with its standard engagement systems. It fired with every functional weapons cluster simultaneously. All 14 operational clusters aimed at the same point on the Vicari Dawn's shield envelope. 14 simultaneous direct hits focused on a single shield node the size of a city block. The node's generator overloaded and shut down before the backup could engage. One gap 3 meters wide. One of the Fenrir's secondary clusters put a focused kinetic round through it. The Vicari Dawn shuddered. Its forward weapons went offline, systems resetting, the way a person goes momentarily still when absorbing a sudden shock. 3 seconds. In those 3 seconds the Fenrir was past the dreadnought's engagement arc and into the center of the reserve fleet. What happened next took 40 seconds and cost the Vicari reserve fleet 6 ships. By every standard calculation, it should not have been possible. One partially damaged warship against 60+ in tight formation should have been destroyed in the first 10 seconds. Instead, the Fenrir moved through the reserve fleet like a controlled thought. Not fast, never fast, but deliberate and continuous, because stopping it required hitting it hard enough to shut down systems that had backups, and shutting down the backups required hitting it again. And by the time Vicari ships cycled their weapons for a second shot, the Fenrir was already somewhere else. Walsh was talking the whole time. Her voice never rose above a normal conversational level. Positions, targets, damage reports, status checks. A continuous stream delivered in the same flat, precise tone she would use to read a weather report. Cole was talking too, from engineering, listing what was breaking and what was replacing it, and what still held and what needed attention. An endless catalog of a ship fixing itself in real time while it was being destroyed. Ellis listened to both of them and made decisions in the spaces between their words. The Vicari Dawn came back online. Its forward weapons arrays, fully restored, swung toward the Fenrir. The shot that followed was the largest single weapon discharge in the entire engagement. It struck the Fenrir's dorsal section and burned through the secondary armor layer in the midsection, damaging the primary hull beneath. The Fenrir's bridge lost power for 4 seconds. 4 seconds of complete darkness. When the lights came back, Ellis was still in his seat. He had not moved. He looked at the damaged display. "Nathan." A pause, longer than usual. "Nathan, report." "Here," Cole said. His voice sounded like a man who had been thrown across a room and gotten back up. "Midsection is bad. Primary hull breach, sections 14 through 17. Emergency seals are holding. We lost engine clusters 3 and 8. Reactor 2 is at 60%. A pause. "But we are here." "Yes," Ellis said, "we are." "Connor," Walsh said, "they are repositioning for another pass." Ellis looked at the tactical display. The Vakari fleet was spreading outward, creating a full encirclement. Korath was building a cage. A clean one. No gap for the Fenrir to push through again. Ellis watched the cage take shape. Then he did something that made Walsh actually turn around in her seat and stare at him. He hailed the Vakari fleet on an open channel. The channel opened and Ellis spoke. "Fleet Admiral Korath. This is Captain Connor Ellis of the human warship Fenrir. I am transmitting our complete hull schematic, weapons configuration, and full propulsion layout to your tactical systems right now." Walsh stared at him. Cole said nothing over the comm. The bridge was silent except for damage alarms being progressively quieted as automated systems dealt with them. On the Vakari dawn, Korath looked at his communications officer. "Is that genuine?" The officer checked. "The transmission is real, full technical data, unencrypted." The data came through. Korath looked at it, the complete schematic of the Fenrir, every layer of armor, every redundant system, every hidden engine, every weapons cluster mapped and labeled. He could see now exactly what they had been fighting for nearly 2 hours. He could see every decision the ship's designer had made and why. He sat with it for a long moment. Then Ellis spoke again. "You are not going to destroy this ship, Admiral. Not because we are better than you, we are not. You have more ships, more firepower, and your crews are excellent. You are not going to destroy this ship because doing so requires more than you have already spent, and you have already spent more than any fleet commander should spend on a single engagement." A pause. "I am not asking you to surrender. I am asking you to stop." Korath looked at Pell. Pell looked back at him. "He is correct," Pell said, his voice very quiet. "We have lost 19 ships. We have damaged or degraded another 15. We have expended more than 60% of this fleet's combat munitions, and that ship is still functional and still in the center of our formation." He paused. "If we expend what remains attempting to finish it, we will have no fleet left to protect our home systems." "It is one ship," Dean said. "It was always one ship," Pell replied. "That is precisely the point." On the Fenrir, Ellis waited. Walsh watched the tactical display. The Vakari fleet was holding position. The encirclement had stopped. Nobody was firing. "Connor," she said softly, "what did you just do?" "I gave him the same information he would have had if we had met at a conference table instead of a battlefield," Ellis said. "The math was always the same. He just needed to see it clearly." The response from Korath came 3 minutes later. "Captain Ellis, I'm going to ask you a question and I want an honest answer." The translation came through clean and direct. "How many of these ships exist?" Ellis looked at the comm panel. "Currently, one, this one." A longer pause. "How many are being built?" Ellis said nothing for a moment. Then, "That is not a question I am going to answer, Admiral." Which was, of course, its own answer. Korath closed the channel. He stood at the center of the Vakari Dawn's bridge and looked at the tactical display. The Fenrir was sitting in the middle of what remained of his fleet, damaged, scarred, and completely functional, and the data transmission it had sent showed him everything he needed to understand about why. He thought about what Pell had said, not a battle, a test. He thought about the human concept of redundancy, of building things to fail safely, to distribute load, to survive past the point where survival should be possible. He had encountered this concept before in engineering texts, in the context of architecture and infrastructure. He had never considered that someone would apply it to a warship. He thought about 19 ships lost before the reserve fleet arrived. He thought about the 6 ships lost in 40 seconds when the Fenrir punched through the reserve formation. He thought about a single ship absorbing fire from more than 60 warships for nearly 2 hours and still sitting there, hailing him on an open channel, sending him blueprints. "Stand down," Korath said. The order moved through the fleet. Weapons powered down, ships held position. On the Fenrir, the tension on the bridge came out in pieces, Walsh releasing a long breath. A technician near the back sitting down heavily in her chair. The sound of Cole over the comm saying, "Okay, okay, okay," in a low voice. The sound a person makes when something that was about to be very bad turns out not to be. Ellis sat down. He had been standing for 20 minutes and had not noticed until now. "Nathan," he said, "full damage assessment when you have it." "Already running," Cole said. "Preliminary answer is a lot, but nothing we cannot fix." Walsh was looking at her board. "Connor, when you transmitted those schematics, you knew what he would see." "Yes." "You knew that if he saw the full design, he would understand that taking us apart would cost more than leaving us alone." "Yes." "You built the deterrence into the ship itself." She paused. "The design was always the weapon." "Cole built it," Ellis said. "I just drove it." In the engineering bay, Cole heard that over the comm and said nothing for a moment. He put down the diagnostic tablet he was holding and looked at the walls of the ship around him. The secondary armor layer still holding on sections, where the outer layer was entirely gone. The rerouted power conduits humming with redirected energy. The backup systems that had replaced the primary systems that had replaced the systems the Vakari had destroyed. And he felt something he had no precise name for. Not pride. Pride was too simple a word for it. It was the feeling of a thing doing exactly what it was built to do. 17 years earlier, in a room full of engineers who had not listened to him, Cole had tried to explain something that was difficult to express in the language of budgets and efficiency metrics and design reviews. He had tried to say that the galaxy was large and full of things nobody had yet predicted, and that a ship should be built not for the battles that were coming, but for the ones that nobody had imagined. He had tried to say, build it for the worst day. The Fenrir had just had its worst day. It was still here. The first formal diplomatic contact between humanity and the Vakari Empire took place 6 weeks later, at a neutral location both sides had agreed upon. Korath arrived with a team of engineers. He had a list of technical questions that filled several pages. He wanted to understand the redundant reactor architecture. He wanted to understand the distributed targeting system. He wanted to understand the layered armor design and the logic behind the scattered propulsion layout. He waited until the formal portion of the meeting was finished, and the technical teams had taken over before he walked over to where Cole was standing with a coffee mug and asked him directly, "Why did you design it this way?" Cole considered the question seriously. He was used to people asking it, and he was used to the fact that they usually wanted a tactical answer, range, firepower, survivability statistics. Korath was asking something different, something underneath the numbers. "Humans spent a long time fighting each other," Cole said. "We have a long history with ships getting destroyed, a long history with systems failing at the worst possible time. We learned the hard way that elegant solutions break in ways you do not expect. Complicated, redundant, overbuilt solutions break too, but they break slowly, and they keep working while they break." He looked at the mug in his hands. "We stopped trying to build ships that could win quickly. We started trying to build ships that could not be made to lose." Korath thought about that for a moment. "Your ship defies all logic," he said. By every standard metric, it should not have survived that engagement. Standard metrics measure the best case, Cole said. We stopped believing in the best case a long time ago. Outside, the Fenrir sat in dock being repaired. Sections of its outer hull were stripped back, exposing the secondary layer beneath, which would itself be replaced before the next deployment. Workers moved across it in teams, fixing what could be fixed and replacing what could not. It did not look beautiful. It had never looked beautiful. It looked like what it was: a ship built by people who had thought carefully about every possible way something could go wrong, and had made sure that none of those ways were final. In the Vekkari Imperial Archives, a single line was added to the official assessment of human military capability. It read, "Do not engage a human warship under the assumption that sufficient damage will be sufficient." And in the broader records of the galaxy, the engagement became known by different names in different languages. But the translation that appeared most often in historical accounts was simple and accurate. They called it the day the unmovable ship refused to move. The Vekkari engineers who studied the Fenrir schematics in the weeks that followed reported the same thing, each one independently, before comparing their notes. The ship was not designed to be the most powerful thing in a fight. It was not designed to be the fastest, or the most precise, or the most advanced. It was designed to still be there when everything else had gone wrong. Every system had a backup. Every backup had a backup. Every backup to the backup had been tested against the scenario in which both previous versions had failed. Humanity had not built a warship. Humanity had built a philosophy. And that philosophy, as the Vekkari Empire would spend several years quietly acknowledging in closed military briefings, was the most dangerous thing in the galaxy. Not because it was new, because it was honest, because it came from a species that had looked at its own history, at every ship lost, every battle gone wrong, every catastrophic system failure at the worst possible moment, and instead of building something that assumed those things would not happen again, had built something that assumed they absolutely would. The Fenrir had not defied logic. It had operated on a different logic entirely. One that began not with the question of how to win, but with the far older and far harder question that humanity had been asking itself since the first time something it built had broken. What happens when it all goes wrong? And what do we build so that wrong is not the end?